The humid evening air of General Santos City carried the familiar sounds of bustling street vendors and distant jeepney engines as Manny Pacquiao stepped out of his black SUV. He had just finished a community meeting at the local gymnasium, discussing youth boxing programs with city officials and concerned parents. The legendary boxer moved with his characteristic humble stride, still wearing the simple white polo shirt and dark slacks that had become his signature look during public appearances. His security detail, led by a man named Manny, maintained a respectful distance, knowing that Manny preferred to interact freely with his people whenever possible. The street was alive with evening commerce, as vendors lined the sidewalk selling everything from grilled fish to fresh mangoes. Children played between the stalls while their parents conducted business, and the warm glow of fluorescent lights created an almost magical atmosphere in the growing dusk. Manny paused to acknowledge the respectful nods and warm smiles from locals who recognized him, but tonight he seemed particularly drawn to simply observing the life around him. The sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air, mixing with the sizzling of street food and the occasional honking of vehicles navigating the narrow road. As he walked slowly down the main street, Manny noticed how the community had grown since his childhood days in this very neighborhood. New shops had opened, and families who once struggled were now operating small businesses, contributing to the local economy. The sight filled him with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his various charitable initiatives and business investments had played a part in this gradual improvement. Yet, despite the progress, he remained acutely aware that poverty still touched many lives in his hometown, and this awareness had shaped his commitment to giving back to his community. The boxer stopped at a small sari-sari store run by an elderly woman named Ligaya, purchasing a bottle of water and exchanging pleasantries about her grandchildren's education. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she counted his change, and Manny gently refused to take the money back, insisting she keep it for her family. These small gestures had become second nature to him over the years, automatic responses born from his deep understanding of what it meant to struggle financially. The woman's grateful smile reminded him of his own grandmother, and how every peso had mattered during his childhood days of uncertainty. The evening crowd began to thin as families headed home for dinner, leaving mostly vendors and a few late shoppers browsing the remaining goods. Manny continued his leisurely walk, appreciating these rare moments when he could move through his hometown without the overwhelming attention that usually accompanied his public appearances. His security team, including Angelo and Isagani, had learned to read his moods and recognized when he needed space to connect with his roots. The simple act of walking among his people, breathing the same air and sharing the same streets, remained one of his most cherished experiences despite his global fame. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens, mixing with the aroma of grilled meat and steamed rice that drifted from family homes. Manny paused near a small intersection where several streets converged, creating a natural gathering place for the community. Streetlights had just begun to flicker on, casting long shadows across the weathered pavement where countless stories of struggle and triumph had unfolded over the years. In this moment, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of his youth, the world champion boxer felt most connected to the man he had been before fame found him, and most committed to the responsibility that success had placed upon his shoulders. As Manny prepared to continue his walk toward the main plaza, a slight movement in the shadows between two buildings caught his peripheral vision. At first, he thought it might be a stray cat or dog seeking shelter for the night, but something about the stillness that followed made him pause and look more carefully. The narrow alley was poorly lit, with only the distant glow from street lamps providing minimal illumination, but his trained eyes gradually made out the small figure huddled against the concrete wall. Years of boxing had sharpened his instincts and awareness, but it was his heart that recognized the human need hiding in that darkened space. The figure belonged to a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with tangled hair that caught the faint light filtering through the alley. Her clothes were worn and dirty, clearly having been worn for many days without washing, and she sat with her knees drawn up to her chest in a position that spoke of both cold and fear. Manny's breath caught in his throat as memories of his own childhood flooded back, remembering nights when he and his siblings had sought similar shelter, uncertain where their next meal would come from. The sight transported him instantly to those early days when survival was a daily question, and hope seemed as distant as the stars above. Security guard Manny had noticed Manny's sudden stop and approached quietly, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio to call for additional support if needed. But Manny raised a gentle hand, signaling for patience and silence, his eyes never leaving the small figure in the alley. The child seemed to sense their presence and looked up with large, dark eyes that reflected a maturity far beyond her years, the kind of premature wisdom that comes from facing hardship too early in life. Those eyes held no fear of the approaching adults, only a weary acceptance that suggested she had learned to expect little kindness from the world. Manny took a slow step closer, mindful not to startle the girl or appear threatening in any way. His movement was deliberate and calm, the same measured approach he used when working with nervous young boxers in his gym back home. The child watched him approach with curious recognition, as if she knew who he was but couldn't quite believe he was standing there in front of her. Her small frame seemed even more fragile in contrast to the rough concrete wall behind her, and Manny could see that beneath the dirt and worn clothing was a beautiful child who deserved so much more than the circumstances that had brought her to this alley. The sounds of the busy street seemed to fade into the background as Manny crouched down to the girl's eye level, maintaining a respectful distance while offering the most genuine smile he could manage. His heart was already breaking for this child, but his expression remained warm and encouraging, drawing on the same gentle strength he used with his own children when they needed comfort. The girl's eyes never left his face, and in them he saw a flicker of something he recognized as hope, tentative and fragile, but unmistakably present. This moment, suspended between stranger and connection, would prove to be the beginning of something that would touch both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. Behind Manny, Angelo and several other security personnel maintained their positions, understanding that their role was to provide safety while allowing their principal the space to follow his conscience. They had witnessed many such encounters over the years and had learned to trust Manny's instincts when it came to reaching out to those in need. The girl's small hand moved slightly, as if she wanted to reach out but didn't quite dare, and Manny noticed the gesture with the keen observation skills that had made him a champion both in and out of the ring. The silence between them stretched for several heartbeats before the young girl's voice broke through the evening air, so soft that Manny had to lean forward slightly to hear her clearly. Her words came in a whisper that carried the weight of countless hungry nights and empty days, a simple statement that cut through all pretense and social barriers with devastating honesty. The child's admission hung in the air between them like a bridge across different worlds, connecting a global champion to the most fundamental human need that transcended fame, wealth, and status. Manny felt the impact of those three simple words, as if they had been delivered with the force of a championship punch, striking directly at the core of who he was beneath all the titles and accolades. His own stomach tightened with remembered hunger from decades past, when he and his siblings would go to bed with empty bellies and wake up hoping that somehow food would appear. The girl's honesty stripped away all the complexity of his current life, reducing everything to the most basic human equation of need and the opportunity to respond with compassion. For a moment, the champion boxer was transported back to his own childhood, when similar words had passed his own lips in desperate moments. He remembered the shame that came with admitting hunger, the vulnerability of revealing such basic need to adults who might or might not choose to help. The courage it had taken for this small girl to voice her situation to a stranger, even one she might recognize, spoke to a strength that impressed him deeply. Her willingness to be vulnerable in this moment reminded him that sometimes the greatest bravery comes from simply telling the truth about our circumstances. Bayani and the other security personnel stood alert but respectful, recognizing that they were witnessing something significant unfold between their principal and this child. Years of working with Manny had taught them to recognize when he encountered someone who touched his heart in a particularly profound way, and they could see that transformation happening in real time. The girl's words had created a space around the two of them that felt almost sacred, a moment where status and position meant nothing compared to basic human connection and need. Manny's mind began racing through possibilities and options, his generous heart already working to find not just an immediate solution, but a way to create lasting change for this child. He thought of his own children safe at home with Jinky, well-fed and surrounded by love and opportunity, and the contrast with this little girl's situation made his chest tight with emotion. The randomness of circumstances that had placed him in a position to help while she faced such uncertainty was not lost on him, and he felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with blessing and success. The evening breeze stirred again, carrying with it the distant sounds of families settling in for dinner, the clink of dishes and murmur of conversation that spoke of security and comfort. This backdrop of normalcy made the girl's situation even more poignant, highlighting how easily children could slip through the cracks of society and find themselves facing hunger alone. As Manny looked into her patient, hopeful eyes, he knew that whatever he did next would be remembered by both of them for the rest of their lives, and he wanted to make sure it was worthy of her courage in speaking up. Without hesitation, Manny reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as he began making calls that would surprise everyone watching. His first call went to Jericho, the manager of the largest restaurant in the downtown area, a man who had grown up in the same neighborhood and understood the community's needs. Manny spoke quietly but urgently, arranging for immediate food service, while also requesting something much more comprehensive than anyone might have expected from a chance encounter on a street corner. The second call went to Renato, a social worker who had partnered with Manny's foundation on previous community outreach projects, asking him to come immediately with intake forms and information about emergency shelter programs. Manny's voice carried an urgency that Renato recognized from their previous collaborations, the tone that meant this was not just another charitable gesture, but something that had touched the boxer's heart, personally. As he spoke, the girl watched with growing amazement, beginning to understand that her simple admission had set something much larger into motion. Bayani received a quiet instruction to coordinate with local authorities, not for any security concern, but to ensure that proper documentation and support services could be arranged for the child. Manny's approach to helping others had evolved over years of experience, and he had learned that sustainable assistance required coordination with established systems and professionals. His spontaneous generosity was being channeled through the infrastructure he had helped build in his community, turning an emotional response into a comprehensive intervention. Within minutes, several vehicles began arriving at the intersection, but rather than creating a spectacle, they positioned themselves discreetly while their occupants coordinated with Manny's security team. Angelo directed traffic flow to minimize attention, while ensuring that the support services Manny had summoned could access the area efficiently. The girl watched this coordinated response with wide eyes, still hardly believing that her simple statement of hunger had triggered such an immediate and organized reaction from so many adults working together. The first to arrive was Emile from the restaurant, carrying not just a warm meal but supplies for several days, understanding from his conversation with Manny that this situation required more than immediate relief. Behind him came Enrico, a volunteer from the local children's services organization, bringing clean clothes, personal hygiene items, and information about educational support programs. The speed and comprehensiveness of the response began drawing curious looks from passing community members who recognized that something significant was happening beyond a simple act of charity. As Manny knelt down beside the girl again, he gently explained that help was arriving and that she would not only have food tonight, but support to address her larger situation. His voice carried the same confidence and determination that had characterized his boxing career, but tempered with a gentleness that came from his role as a father and his deep understanding of childhood vulnerability. The girl's expression shifted from amazement to something approaching trust, as she began to comprehend that this stranger was offering her not just a meal, but the possibility of a different future altogether. Word of Manny's impromptu intervention began spreading through the neighborhood with the speed that only small communities can achieve, and within an hour, a remarkable scene had developed around the small intersection. Thomas and Ariel, local business owners who had benefited from Manny's previous community investments, arrived with additional supplies and offers of employment opportunities for any family members who might need work. Their spontaneous participation demonstrated how Manny's years of community investment had created a network of people ready to respond when needs arose. Carlo, a teacher from the nearby elementary school, appeared with enrollment forms and information about the breakfast program that could ensure the girl received regular meals if she were able to attend classes. His presence represented the educational opportunities that Manny had always emphasized as crucial for breaking cycles of poverty, and he spoke with the girl about her previous schooling with a patience and kindness that immediately put her at ease. The teacher's involvement transformed the evening from a moment of charity into the beginning of a comprehensive support system. Local families began arriving as well, drawn by curiosity, but staying because they recognized an opportunity to participate in something meaningful. Joaquin and his wife Mayumi brought their own children to help distribute supplies, teaching them through example about community responsibility and compassion. Other parents, including Andres and Clarita, coordinated with social services to offer temporary housing options, while longer-term arrangements could be made for the girls' care and education. The transformation of the street corner into a hub of community action caught the attention of Rafael, a local journalist who arrived hoping to document the story, but was asked by Manny to focus on the broader issue of child welfare rather than the specific incident. Manny's media awareness came from years of experience, and he understood the importance of protecting the child's privacy while using the moment to highlight the ongoing needs in their community. His request to shift focus from individual charity to systemic support demonstrated his evolution from reactive giving to strategic community development. Edgardo, the director of the local children's center, arrived with a van equipped to provide immediate assessment and support services, transforming the street gathering into an impromptu intake session. His professional presence ensured that the girl's immediate needs were met according to proper protocols, while also connecting her with ongoing support systems. The collaboration between Manny's spontaneous generosity and established social services created a model response that impressed everyone involved. As the evening progressed, it became clear that this single encounter had catalyzed something much larger than anyone had anticipated. The girl, now clean, fed, and surrounded by caring adults, seemed to transform before everyone's eyes, from a frightened child hiding in shadows to a young person with hope and possibility ahead of her. Her courage in speaking up had not only changed her own circumstances, but had demonstrated to an entire community the power of responding to need with comprehensive, coordinated action rather than simple charity. The following morning brought unexpected developments as news of the previous evening's events spread throughout General Santos City and beyond. Miguel, the mayor's chief of staff, contacted Manny's office to discuss implementing the coordinated response model as a standard protocol for addressing child homelessness in the city. The spontaneous collaboration between private citizens, local businesses, and social services had impressed city officials who had been struggling to create effective systems for supporting vulnerable children. Media outlets, led by Roberto from the regional television station, requested interviews not about Manny's personal charity, but about the community response model that had emerged from the encounter. Manny agreed to participate, but only if the focus remained on sustainable systems rather than individual heroics, and if the girl's identity remained completely protected. His insistence on systemic focus, rather than personal recognition, demonstrated his understanding that lasting change required community-wide commitment rather than dependence on celebrity intervention. The restaurant owner Jericho reported that several other business owners had contacted him about creating a coordinated network for emergency food assistance, inspired by how quickly resources had been mobilized the previous evening. Dante, who owned a construction company, offered to provide job training programs for older homeless youth, while Inigo, a local banker, proposed creating a microloan program for families at risk of homelessness. The ripple effects continued expanding as community members recognized their own ability to contribute to solutions. Educational institutions became involved as Noel, the superintendent of schools, announced an expanded outreach program to identify and support children who might be missing school due to housing instability. Leonardo, who directed the technical college, offered scholarships and support services for older youth aging out of the child welfare system. These educational components addressed Manny's long-standing belief that education remained the most reliable path out of poverty for young people in their community. Crispin, a social worker who had responded to the initial call, began documenting the evening's events as a case study for best practices in community response to child welfare emergencies. His analysis would later be shared with other communities facing similar challenges, extending the impact far beyond General Santos City. The professional documentation ensured that the lessons learned could be replicated and improved upon in other locations. The girl herself, now temporarily housed with a foster family while permanent arrangements were being made, had begun attending school with Carlo as her teacher and was receiving counseling support from Armando, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. Her transformation from homeless child to supported student demonstrated the power of comprehensive intervention, while her continued relationship with Manny ensured that she remained connected to the community support network that had rallied around her. The speed of positive change in her circumstances inspired everyone involved to continue developing and improving their collective response systems. 3 months later, the encounter had evolved into a formal community program called the Immediate Response Network. Coordinated by Victor from Manny's Foundation and Jaime from the city's Social Services Department, the program trained volunteers throughout the city to recognize signs of child homelessness and hunger, providing them with direct contact information for rapid response teams that could mobilize resources within hours rather than days. The system addressed gaps that had previously left vulnerable children waiting weeks for assistance while their situations deteriorated. The girl fan, whose name was revealed to be Ligaya, though not the store owner from that first night, had become something of a poster child for the program's success, though her privacy remained carefully protected. Ernesto, her new foster father, reported that she had caught up academically and was showing particular talent in mathematics and art. Her story became a powerful example of how quickly children could recover and thrive when provided with stability, nutrition, and educational support, inspiring continued community investment in similar interventions. Local businesses had formalized their participation through a coalition led by Elmer, creating a sustainable funding model that didn't depend on Manny's personal resources. Ruben coordinated restaurant participation, Daniel managed construction company involvement, and Rogelio handled banking and financial services support. This business network ensured that the program could continue growing and serving more children without overwhelming any single contributor or depending too heavily on celebrity involvement. The program's success attracted attention from other cities throughout the Philippines, with delegations coming to study the General Santos model. Alfredo, a social policy researcher from Manila, spent 2 weeks documenting the system's operations and outcomes, while Julian from Cebu City adapted the model for implementation in urban areas with different demographics. The replication of successful elements validated Manny's belief that sustainable change required systems that could function independently of any single individual's involvement. Educational outcomes became a particular point of pride, as Arturo, the regional education director, reported significant improvements in school attendance and academic performance among children served by the program. Hernando, who taught at the high school level, noted that older students who had benefited from intervention were now volunteering as mentors for newer participants, creating a positive cycle of support within the educational system. The program's success in educational settings demonstrated its value not just for immediate crisis intervention, but for long-term community development. Manny continued his personal relationship with Ligaya, visiting regularly and ensuring that her progress remained on track, but he had successfully transitioned from being her sole support to being one member of a comprehensive network. Florencio, the program coordinator, reported that dozens of children had now been served through the system, with success rates that impressed social workers throughout the region. The transformation from a single act of charity to a sustainable community resource represented exactly the kind of lasting impact that Manny had always hoped his success could enable. 2 years after that evening encounter, Ligaya stood on the stage of the city auditorium as the valedictorian of her elementary school class, her academic achievements representing not just personal success, but validation of the community's investment in vulnerable children. Manny sat in the audience with Jinky and their children, watching with pride as the girl who had once whispered about hunger now spoke confidently about her dreams of becoming a teacher herself. Her transformation symbolized the potential that existed within every child who faced similar circumstances, waiting only for the right combination of support and opportunity. The Immediate Response Network had evolved into a regional model, with Wilfredo serving as the director of an expanded program that now operated in 15 cities across Mindanao. Vicente coordinated volunteer training, Orlando managed the business partnership network, and Benedicto oversaw the educational components that had proven crucial for long-term success. The program's growth demonstrated how a moment of human connection could be transformed into institutional change that outlasted any individual involvement. Research conducted by Pacquiao, a university professor studying poverty intervention programs, showed that children served by the network had educational completion rates 30% higher than regional averages, with many going on to technical training or university education. Eleazar, who directed the program's scholarship fund, reported that former participants were beginning to return as volunteers and donors, creating a sustainable cycle of support that no longer required external funding for basic operations. International attention came from Gregorio, a representative from UNICEF, who visited to study the program's replication potential in other developing countries. His report highlighted the importance of community ownership and business participation in creating sustainable responses to child welfare challenges. The recognition validated the approach that had emerged from Manny's instinctive response to Ligaya's simple statement of need, proving that grassroots solutions could achieve impact comparable to major governmental or international aid programs. Manny's role had evolved from primary supporter to inspiring example, as Amado and other community leaders took increasing responsibility for program operations and development. His foundation continued providing support, but the network's independence allowed him to focus on new initiatives while knowing that this particular effort would continue serving children regardless of his personal involvement. The sustainability of the program represented his understanding that true leadership meant creating systems that could function and grow without depending on any single individual. On the evening of the program's second anniversary, Manny walked through the same intersection where he had first encountered Ligaya, now bustling with families and children who moved through the streets with greater security and hope. Alonso, as a local volunteer, reported that no child had been found sleeping in the neighborhood's alleys for over 18 months, a statistic that represented not just effective intervention, but prevention of the circumstances that had originally brought a hungry girl to seek shelter in the shadows. The transformation of both individual lives and community systems stood as testament to the power of responding to simple human need with comprehensive, sustained action. If you like this story, leave your like and subscribe to our channel.